Once upon a time, there were nomadic Jews wandering the earth in search of a homeland. They had been expelled from many places around the world. The nomads came up with a brilliant idea to end their homelessness. They created a fairy tale book called the Old Testament. The Old Testament consists of mythological characters based off the stories they gathered from the many places they once lived. A few of the Old Testament's many magical characters include Abraham, Moses, and David. But the meanest, most intimidating character of them all was a monolithic sky daddy they called God. This God possessed magical powers. He made everything and everybody, knew everything, and lived in a magical place called heaven. Because the nomadic Jews were desperate and homeless, they, of course, claimed that God chose them as his favorite people and promised them a homeland called Israel. This God defended his favorite people by murdering and attacking many non-Jewish villages. He put curses and plagues on people and consistently gave orders to slaughter and kill men, women, and children. The nomadic Jews deliberately created this God to be big and bad in order to send a strong message to those who would rise against them. Their message was, if you keep mistreating us, our God will destroy you. All of the fables, characters, and propaganda became known as Judaism. As time passed, Rome emerged on the world scene as a mighty empire. The Roman Empire, however, became threatened with the spread of Judaism and its militant God. The Romans waged a war against the Jews called the Roman-Jewish War. Although Rome won the war, they still needed something to keep Judaism and its bad-tempered God from spreading again. The Romans came up with a brilliant idea of creating a kind, gentle, loving, and forgiving character that would subdue those who would otherwise convert to Judaism's big, bad, and angry God. This character became known as Jesus, the Son of God, and the book became the New Testament. Jesus, based off many other preceding God-Son myths, also possessed magical powers. The Romans were clever enough to make all the characters in the New Testament Jewish also, in order to maintain continuity with the fables of the Old Testament and make the new fables seem plausible. All of the fables, characters, and propaganda became known as Christianity. The combining of the Old Testament fables with the New Testament fables has become what is known as the Bible. As time passed, the Arab population grew large and strong, and the Ottoman Turks conquered much of the Christian world. But the Arabs were missing something, a God of their own. So, like the Jews and the Romans, they too came up with a brilliant idea and created a God called Allah. Allah was just as big, bad, and angry as the God of the Old Testament. The Arabs fell for the fables created by the Jews and Romans, but they needed their particular fable to appear original, so they created a prophet called Muhammad, who possessed magical powers also. The Arabs claimed Muhammad was the final prophet because the people didn't obey Jesus, who was a mythological character himself. All of the fables, characters, and propaganda became known as Islam, and its book is called the Quran. The Old Testament, being fictional, naturally means that the New Testament, which is based off the Old Testament, is fictional, which naturally means the Quran, which includes many of the fictional prophets of the Old and New Testament, is fictional also. One cannot believe in the fables of the New Testament without believing in the fables of the Old Testament, and one cannot be a believer of the Quran without believing in the fables of the Old and New Testament. As time has passed, the myths, which all started with the nomadic Jews, are now widely believed by most of the world's inhabitants. Israel has become a Jewish homeland because of these fables. The Arabs and Jews for centuries have fought one another because of these fables, and countless of people continue to die in the name of the big three fictional Judeo religions called Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. At the core of the conflicts around the world, particularly the so-called Middle East, is simply a contest of whose God is the biggest and baddest. If you burn the Quran, you might as well burn the Bible, which gave birth to the Quran. But instead of burning the Quran or the Bible, in the name of world peace, do the human species a huge favor. Burn the fairy tale that gave birth to them all. Let's assume that before human beings, things on earth did what they did. The earth spun, the sun shined, the moon glowed, the grass grew, the waters rushed, and the wind blew. If we somehow managed to destroy ourselves, wouldn't the earth continue doing what it does? The fact is, the world did not and does not need our religions, blessings, prayers, or God personifications to exist, nor is the world affected by what we think things are or how we think things came to be. What will be, with or without us. Humans tend to perceive God anthropomorphically. In other words, we claim God sees because we have eyes. We claim God hears because we have ears. We claim God loves because we have hearts. We use ourselves as measuring sticks when assigning attributes to God. That's only natural. But doesn't this make God really only what we have imagined? Human beings have personified God in every way imaginable. We impose our views on one another and then kill in defense of these dogmatic and inflexible interpretations. We tend to see our God personifications as the truth and all others as myth. But every culture, without exception, arrived at their particular beliefs in God personifications by way of mythology. Our variety of ideas about God are driven by our imaginations. Our imaginations are the foundations of all of our creations, including what we imagine God to be. Mythology is said to be the universal tongue of human imagination and is used as a tool for self-discovery and gaining access to the secrets of the psyche. Mythology is the timeless expression of the human imagination and helps to appease our natural curiosities. Imagination is the central ingredient in mythology. The truth, however, is that God is made in man's image. Whatever man has imagined God to be is precisely what God has become. That has not made man's image of God correct. It just means that God has been molded in the imagination of man. Man, throughout millenniums, have breathed life into all kinds of gods and goddesses, and even given them a wide range of supernatural abilities. Without the dynamics of the human imagination, would gods even exist? What in fact does exist outside of the realm of our imaginations? Non-personified gods and goddesses are moot entities, relegated to non-god status, since they have not yet been assigned names, genders, and attributes. Our imaginations give our gods arms and legs, a purpose and mission. We imagine our gods as omnipotent and all-knowing, and look to them for protection and guidance. Cultures throughout the world have connected their ideas of gods and their attributes with the natural world and the daily events that influence and inspire their lives. Our ideas about gods and goddesses have always been limited by what we see around us. The ancient Egyptians, for example, who introduced to the world a god concept, nourished their ideas of a god from the primary sources which profoundly impacted their lives: great sunshine, desert land, and a sustenance-providing river. Thus came the inspiration that created their god pantheon. After the yearly floods, nutrients were left behind, which fertilized the soil, producing an abundance of life in all forms. This occurrence, quite naturally, gave rise to their ideas concerning creation. This flooding of the Nile was the inspiration for many other flood stories, which are very common in ancient mythologies. There is absolutely nothing original about the imaginary story of Noah. Manu, one of many Noah-like characters that preceded the story of Noah, was also told to build an ark and to load it with all the animals. Because of the life-bringing force of the yearly flood, the ancient Egyptians imagined life emerging from a single mound that rose out of primordial waters, which contained a procreative energy which was the source of all life. In ancient India, Brahma, creator of all living things, was also imagined to have emerged from primordial waters. In ancient China, what they considered their 5 sacred mountains helped to shape their ideas about the god Pangu, whose body was imagined to transform into these mountains. Christianity is the world's most popular religion and was popularized by the Romans, which is the combination of the Greeks and the Romans. Christianity, like other world religions, is in the God personification business and is not exempt from being a product of man's imagination. Christianity, however, is unique because its concepts of creation and God personifications were derived from much older stories, primarily that of ancient Egypt. Because of this shortcut trip into the realm of religion, the natural world was not a factor in the evolution of Christianity, nor was this Abrahamic hierarchical-based belief system solely motivated by humans seeking understanding or spiritual upliftment. Christian fathers were also interested in world domination, conquest, and having psychological control over the masses. So the image of who they claim is the embodiment of God is literally them, and of course made in their image. The God of the Bible made the world in about a week, then rested afterwards. Because of man's inherent fallible nature, the authors of the Bible had their God create the herbs, grass, and vegetation before the creation of the sun. The world is approximately 25,000 miles in circumference, but according to the Bible, God chose Israel, a small country located east of the Mediterranean Sea, as his primary source of interest. And although there are 6.2 billion people in the world of all different races, nationalities, and cultures, God chose Jews as his primary people. The story in Exodus, where Moses frees the Jews from bondage in Egypt, is another mythological story. Not only are there no archaeological, anthropological, excavational, or historical evidence of this deliverance, but there have been several lawgivers which preceded Moses that share nearly identical stories. Gods are often thought of as life givers, but more human beings have been killed in the many names given to our imagined gods than in all of the secular wars combined. There has been a worldwide consensus that the book called the Holy Bible are God's inspired words. Others will claim their holy books are the inspired words of God. Human beings have a long and storied history of going to war, attempting to prove each other's belief right. But how are some humans' imaginations right and some wrong? No religious text is responsible for inventing the principles of love, truth, peace, and reciprocity. These are timeless principles that transcend all religions and their imagined gods. These principles are embodied within the timeless cycles of nature. Christian text, posing as God's inspired words, was in fact actually written, edited, and arranged by those holding power and influence over the masses. Few believers understand that the stories, characters, and passages in the Bible were all decided by men, not designed by God. The Bible is not only a retelling of much older myths, but it is also a library or compilation of books written over several centuries. Concepts like the Holy Trinity, the resurrection, virgin birth, etc. were all decisions created from the imagination of man. Meetings were held, councils were assembled, and debates were conducted to determine the most effective effective biblical stories to include or withhold from the masses. Men in power also created the concept of hell in order to create great fear. Individuals who are afraid are easier to exploit and control. The aspect of fear and intimidation enabled Christianity to spread rapidly throughout the world. Incredible amounts of wealth have been amassed by manipulating the imaginations of people. It was man-made laws that prohibited anyone from disagreeing with Christian dogma. Man-made laws made it illegal to have more than one belief system. Man made it mandatory by law to believe in the so-called Holy Trinity. This is precisely why free-thinking human beings that do not adhere to Christian dogma or accept the notion of Jesus as their personal Savior are looked upon by the believer as if they're breaking the law. The authors of the Bible made their particular God aggressive, intimidating, intolerant, demanding, and judgmental. In what is called the Old Testament, this man-made deity orders attacks on villages and is known for inflicting pain and suffering on anyone who doesn't play by his rules. This monolithic personification is also known for slaughtering women and children, but is usually found sparing the lives of virgins. Yet despite all of these horrible qualities, like the many other stories found in ancient societies, this God too was given a son. In fact, human beings are known for giving sons to their masculine deities. These sons mainly possess the same attributes. The most popular son of all these imagined gods is Jesus. Why? Because Jesus throughout history has not only been marketed the most, but countless people have been killed for not accepting this particularly late-coming Savior in world mythology. Because there is no historical evidence of this most popular Son of God, with the exception of the Bible, Jesus exists entirely within the imaginations of the believer. The story of Jesus must be believed in order to be made real. Human beings love their preachers too. They stand on stages every week preaching those words they naively claim are from the one and only authentic God. They do a great job at obtaining money from the masses, keeping them in a state of delusion, fostering ignorance, and maintaining dependence. According to man, God punishes non-believers and rewards believers, but there is no empirical evidence or obvious advantage that believers have over non-believers. Believers do not automatically live longer, encounter less problems, pay less bills, or experience less pain than non-believers. Believers pay the same price for gas as non-believers. Believers take comfort, however, in the imaginational place called heaven that they believe awaits them when they die. It is their psychological trump card that is played quite often when their premise of blind belief encounters the unshakable wall of logic. Never mind the fact that there are over 30,000 children who die every day from disease and starvation. Never mind there are thousands of innocent children involved in religious wars adults created. Never mind there are thousands of child sex slaves. Deforestation, rising ocean levels, and the destruction of wildlife are very serious issues. But despite all of this, believers of the Christian faith actually believe God is miraculously involved in the arena of sports. How delusional it is to believe that with all of these terrible things going on in the world, a so-called righteous God will concern himself with such trivial matters. Humans claim that God is a supreme being, but then object to notions of supremacy. Gods are made in man's image. Man provides their gods with names and images. Man gives their gods sons. Man writes religious books and then claims they are the inspired words of the God they created. Man makes their gods monolithic or polytheistic. Man gives their imagined gods a gender, a voice, an adversary, a home to dwell in, and an image. There are approximately 6.2 billion people in the world. At some point in time, early in our lives, we became aware of our names. We became aware that we belonged to a particular family in a particular part of the world. None of us knew when we were conceived or had any recollection of being in our mother's womb. Everyone, without exception, had this same experience. How then is anyone else more or less connected to any divine source than the next human being? How is any group chosen over any other group? No individual is equipped with more godliness than the next. In each and every one of us lies a god or goddess within. Each of us are born with our own unique and imaginative spirit. The moment one human being tells another human being how to imagine, interpret, or implement that spirituality, it becomes religion. That's basically the hallmark of religion. It's the practice of manipulating the imagination. No natural spirituality comes with a set of prescribed laws, images, or dogmatic literature. These are all man-made creations. Religion has caused countless wars and millions of lives. Religion stifles the unlimited potential of the God and Goddess within. Religion is about order, law, and manipulation. It goes against the freedom so many of us desperately seek. We must free ourselves from the delusion of a sky daddy who throws darts on bad people and rewards good people. It is our imaginations that allow us to believe that disease, war, and the suffering of innocent little children are permitted because of some divine plan. It makes us believe that God was the reason our car started in the morning and is behind our favorite team winning. We cannot continue to expect godly intervention to improve things in the world. We are responsible for that. Imagination is a very powerful tool, but like every tool, must be used wisely. Tools used improperly can be dangerous. In our quest for gods and goddesses, let's keep our imaginations, but let's never neglect to look in the mirror. There you will find an incredibly resourceful, powerful, and creative god or goddess waiting for you to recognize its attributes and unlimited potential.